Welcome to the Probate Nation. Whether you're caring for an elderly loved one as a court-appointed conservator or guardian, or as an agent named an advanced medical directive or financial power of attorney, or just helping out without any of these authorities, your primary goal in each instance is to provide your loved one with the best care possible as they age. Often that care involves paying for caregivers in their home, or may involve paying for that care in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. Getting good care for your loved one is important. Paying for it is often the challenge. If your loved one does not have long-term care insurance, and many folks do not, then you may have to seek assistance from the federal government program called Medicaid. There are many facets of Medicaid, and each state handles this federal program a bit differently on a practical basis. But I want to stress at the outset that qualifying for Medicaid is not something you should undertake as a do-it-yourself project. Our show tonight will focus on adult long-term care Medicaid in the District of Columbia, and our two guests are attorneys from D.C. who handle long-term care Medicaid planning and applications for District of Columbia adults. They will serve as our guide as we explore this long-term care financing option for all who may be traveling on the D.C. Living Probate train. Our first guest is a senior associate at the Elder and Disability Law Center in D.C. She graduated from Boston College Law School in 2011 and clerked at the Massachusetts Superior Court for a year before joining EDLC. She's a certified dementia practitioner, and her law practice focuses on long-term care Medicaid planning and eligibility, life care planning and management, estate planning, and supplemental needs trust. Our second guest is the principal in the Landsman Law Group in Rockville, Maryland, where he focuses his practice on Medicaid planning and applications, guardianships, estate planning, and administration. He is a founding member and longtime board member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. He is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and has been honored in the elder law field as one of Maryland's super lawyers, Washington, D.C.'s best lawyers, and top lawyers by Washingtonian magazine. Please welcome attorneys Abby Wolf and Ron Landsman. All that talent and experience. I really appreciate you guys coming in today to talk about this topic.
Thank you for having us.
Well, you're very welcome. Abby, you know, let's kind of go to the big picture and talk about how do aging adults pay for long-term care costs, you know, whether it's in the home or in a nursing home?
So typically there's only three options. Some people have long-term care insurance, which may cover all or some of their long-term care costs. One option is also to pay for it privately, and the third option is to apply for long-term care Medicaid benefits.
And frequently the long-term care Medicaid is typically the last option people end up going to.
Yes.
Often. So, Ron, what adult long-term care program does Medicaid actually pay for? That seems like it's a big word that doesn't mean as much as we think.
Certainly the largest program is nursing home care.
Okay.
And it has the advantage of being sort of simple, well-defined. You're in a nursing home; it will provide most of the services you need. But there are home care programs they're called waiver programs for reasons not worth going into, and so they sometimes will pay for care at home. More limited, more complicated, but it's possible.
Okay. Now, does Medicaid pay, we talked about this, does Medicaid pay for assisted living?
Not directly.
Okay.
I think the answer is no.
Okay. Okay. Now, Abby, are there qualification criteria that we have to deal with in order to receive Medicaid coverage for these adult long-term care programs?
Yes, there's actually pretty strict criteria.
Oh, really?
So generally, you have to meet medical eligibility criteria as well as financial. And with financial, they are looking at the individual's income and resources. And then they're also looking at a 5-year reporting period or a look-back period where they're seeing if someone made any gifts or uncompensated transfers within 5 years of applying for Medicaid.
We're going to come back to that 5-year look back. That can be somewhat challenging. Ron, while Medicaid is a federal program, are there differences in how the programs are actually implemented in each state?
Yes, there are actually huge differences. It's a federal program, federal funding, federal standards, but each state administers the program themselves, and they're both allowed to design their programs to have some differences, and even where they're not meant to be differences, there often are. And indeed, in some areas, it'll vary from county to county or office to office. So But certainly between DC and Maryland and Virginia, there are extremely important differences.
So I do want to alert our viewers that we are going to be doing this program and taking a look at this from both Maryland perspective, DC perspective, and Virginia perspective because of those very differences that you just mentioned, Ron, that we want to be aware of. Now, Ron, are there different qualification criteria for a single person as opposed to a married person?
Yes, there are. So in theory, at least, the system says we want to protect what we call the community spouse, the spouse who's not living in a nursing home. Could be at home, could be a condo, could be apartment, could be assisted living, any place but a nursing home. Mm-hmm. The system is designed to pay for the care of the nursing home and protect some resources and some income for the person at home. And really the thing to say about DC is it's extremely flexible. And so in most cases we can protect really a substantial amount for the community spouse. I think many of the people listening to the program will have heard of a thing called the resource allowance for the community spouse. They'll hear a number like 125,000. It's easy to protect additional resources for the spouse, but you have to sort of fit it into the little box that they have.
Okay, and we're going to come back and talk about that little box as we go along. Now, the last thing, are Medicaid payments made directly to the provider, or do they reimburse the family?
That's a key element. Is payment is always to the provider. Okay. The only time an individual gets reimbursed is there's been litigation, there's court orders directing it. Very rare. It's always just payment to the provider.
Okay, and that's good. That's very good to know. Now, Abby, let's talk about Medicaid at home eligibility. Mm-hmm. So, does DC offer Medicaid services in the home?
Yes, they do, and that's called a Medicaid waiver program.
Waiver program.
So typically for adults who would prefer to age in place rather than going to a nursing home, they would be looking at the elderly and physically disabled waiver. It does have specific criteria. A lot of the criteria are the same as the long-term care in a facility, but there's one exception, and that there is an income cap on the Medicaid waiver program.
So we have to be worried about that income and make sure we don't bump across that.
Exactly. So for some of our higher earners, they're not going to be able to apply for Medicaid waiver.
Okay. Well, that of course is good to know too. Well, let's talk about Medicaid in nursing home eligibility, Ron. What does Medicaid cover in the way of services that are delivered at the nursing home?
Virtually everything a person needs. I mean, it's understood that this is where the person lives, and so it has to provide food, shelter, medical care. It used to be we would have to fight over things like toothpaste.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness.
That's been taken care of. I mean, it doesn't pay for haircuts for those who still need them. It doesn't pay for, for niceties like that. It doesn't pay for, wouldn't pay for a TV. It doesn't pay for, reading material and sort of, they call them luxuries, but things that are not really basic food, clothing, and shelter. But within that, they cover everything, including they coordinate with Medicare, but it will include medications and other types of therapy. Now, that's not to say that the resident always get all the things they need, and so sometimes you have to do advocacy to make sure they're getting what they need, but at least that's part of the plan is that the nursing home will provide all that.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. So, Abby, what are the basic eligibility requirements in order to be able to qualify for this program?
Sure. So first, the person must be aged, blind, or disabled, and aged is 65 or over.
Well, good. I qualify for that part.
They must be a U.S. citizen or a qualified alien, which is basically they have to be a green card holder who's been in the country for at least 5 years.
Okay.
And then we get into the more technical requirements for Medicaid itself. So for long-term care, they have to meet a medical eligibility, which is whether or not the individual requires a nursing home level of care.
Okay.
So that's when they're looking at their functional capabilities. Can they do things like get themselves dressed or bathe themselves? Do they need help getting to the bathroom? Those types of things.
Sure.
They'll also look at individuals with dementia who may be physically capable but not really mentally able to carry out basic tasks.
Okay.
So if you meet the medical level of care, then we look at the financial. So there's the income eligibility, which if you're applying for long-term care in a nursing facility, then they're just looking at, is your income less than the cost of the nursing home, which for most individuals, that is not a problem.
You're right.
As I said before, with the waiver program, there is an income cap. It is based on 300% of the supplemental security income limit. So this year, that's $2,313.
That's for the waiver program.
For the waiver program only. So we have income, and then we have resources. So Medicaid looks at everything that an individual owns. So when we talk about resources, we're thinking your car, your bank accounts, your house, your personal belongings. And so basically, Medicaid has said some of those are going to be exempt. We're going to let you have them, and we're not going to worry about them. And then Medicaid has also said, well, but some things we are going to count. So there's a countable resource limit that has to be met.
Okay.
And for an individual applying for Medicaid, it's $4,000 or less in countable resources.
Okay.
So far we've got the medical, we have the income, the resources, and then the last component is if you meet all those other criteria, then they look at, did you make any gifts or uncompensated transfers in the last 5 years before applying for Medicaid?
So we're going to come back to that, but that's the whole process where we try to make sure that our financial situation meets the criteria, but if you reshuffle the deck in a way that's not appropriate or permitted, you may find that that effort is for naught.
Yes.
So we're going to come back and talk about that some more.
If
What?
I can
Yes,
throw
sir.
in one thing.
Sure.
Abby knows, but it's easy to not remember. You have to be what's called a resident of the district to qualify for benefits. There will be people who will tell you, well, you need to be here 6 months or longer. That's not true. If you arrive in the district and you intend to stay in the district, the day you arrive, you are a resident for Medicaid purposes. If you arrive in the district and you're too confused to have an intent to stay someplace, that if you're physically here, you're a resident. So that's virtually never a difficulty, but some people will try and scare you off by saying it's an issue.
And I remember us talking about that during the pre-interview work we did, and that's very important.
Yep.
So we're not, again, that's almost like the, whether you have to file a tax return, you have the intent to stay and become domiciled there is the key.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yes,
Same
very much
issue.
so. Well, let's take a look at countable income for qualification purposes. So what is the DC qualification income for a single person, Abby?
So for income, again, we're just looking at whether or not the person's income is less than the cost of the nursing facility.
Okay.
If they're in a nursing facility. If they're at home, then it's the $2,313 cap, but that changes typically annually as Social Security changes its numbers.
Okay. And then what is the DC qualification income for a married person? Is it different?
So it's actually the same for a married person. With income, Medicaid is only looking at the individual who is applying.
Okay.
We call that the institutionalized spouse. They're only looking at the institutionalized spouse's income.
Okay.
Different for resources, but for income, they do separate them.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So let's move then on to the discussion, Ron, about countable assets for qualification. So are all assets counted in determining eligibility for Medicaid?
No, actually, the district actually has a couple of fairly generous rules. So certainly the major exempt resources, a home and a car. And for the single individual, it could be the home they lived in before they went into the nursing home. It's still exempt. Most liquid assets are countable. The big exception in DC, which is really quite important, is retirement plans. IRAs, 401ks, thrift savings plans, federal 403bs. All of those are disregarded by Medicaid at the eligibility stage for determining whether you get benefits or
I was
not.
surprised to hear that.
A lot of states will
carve-out.
disregard the spouse's IRA, but DC is a little bit more generous. It's not the only one, but it's good that way. The other things that won't count, so for example, if someone owns a real property with someone else and the other person doesn't agree to sell, which mostly they would be advised not to, Medicaid will disregard that as a resource. But things you have access to, cash value of life insurance, bank accounts, investment accounts, cash at home, all of those are counted.
So what are some of the assets, you mentioned a little bit of it, but so some of the other assets that there's that are not countable assets?
Well, I mentioned the home, the car, household goods, and then a prepaid funeral.
Prepaid funeral.
And as Abby said, another $4,000 in any one account. And the prepaid funeral, there are different ways to satisfy that. Certainly the easiest one is to go to a nursing home, which is going to know what the rules are, and literally prepay the funeral.
Okay.
Funeral home, right.
What is, and what is the amount of countable assets a single person may own?
So once you get all the excluded assets out, it's that $4,000.
$4,000, okay.
That Abby referred to.
Now, Abby, what is the amount of countable assets a married person may own? Again, we do have these distinctions we're kind of looking at.
So that's where it gets a little technical. So when you have a married couple, Medicaid is looking at them as a financial unit. So they are looking at everything that both members of the couple own.
Okay.
The community spouse, the non-applicant spouse, is entitled to keep what's called a community spouse resource allowance. And that's going to be based on a few different numbers, mostly what the couple had in countable assets when the institutionalized spouse first became institutionalized. And there's a mathematical formula that Medicaid uses, but generally it's going to fall within a range. The maximum that a community spouse gets to keep right now, this year, is $126,420.
That is a fairly precise number.
It is a precise number, and most years it'll increase with cost of living, but that's what it is for 2019.
Okay, okay. So let's turn to some qualification pitfalls, which I know there are a number of those. So Abby, what are some of those common pitfalls that applicants run into in meeting the countable income qualification requirement?
Well, for income, it's more, again, comes back to the waiver program, and it's whether you're over or not. And that it's really, unfortunately, there's not a lot of planning you can do for that, because in most cases, especially in our area in DC, we have a lot of individuals with a federal pension. We have a lot of individuals on Social Security. You can't assign those to your spouse. So typically, if you're over the income limit for waiver, you're just over it.
You're just over it.
Yeah.
So Ron, how about the common pitfalls applicants run into in meeting the countable asset requirements when they're, what are some of the things that
Well, I guess the problem is, from my point of view, the problem is not the difficulty in getting eligible. The problem is not recognizing that eligibility is the only concern that you might have. So when someone has gotten Medicaid benefits, when they pass away, if they have a probate estate, that estate is exposed to recovery by Medicaid. So whatever Medicaid paid for their care in the nursing home, with a few minor exceptions, Medicaid is entitled to recover back when they've passed away. So if they own a home and they haven't done anything to avoid probate, when they pass away, the home is exposed to probate, and Medicaid is almost guaranteed to file a claim. So it's not a pitfall for eligibility, but if you qualify and you've got a home sitting out there, you have to recognize that unless you do something, a home will be exposed to recovery. The other practical problem is getting the information in time so that you know what it is you have to spend down. A small cash value life insurance. Those are probably the biggest headache. If you left $400 in your bank account and it turns out your cash value insurance has a $3,900 cash value, and you haven't done anything to move it out of your name in an appropriate way, you're going to have a problem. So it's collecting the information, knowing what's coming in. One thing that's not a problem, that people are confused by it, is the income that comes in on the first day of the month doesn't count against the $4,000 limit for that month. The income is going to be spent that month if you qualify. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about.
That's interesting. Well, I think one thing I do want to make our viewers understand is that while we do talk about qualifying, I think one of the things that came out from our discussion is there is a planning component, which we'll get into a little bit in a subsequent show, making sure that we don't allow these assets to be subject to that recovery claim when someone does pass away. Indeed
to reorganize your assets and to reinvest them in a way that Medicaid will disregard.
Yes, and that's a critically important part of the planning process.
Yes, that's actually most of what we do in the planning context. As you said earlier, you can't do much about income. It usually can't be assigned, can't be transferred, but resources can be.
Okay. Now, Ron, are there tested and accepted strategies to spend down assets and transfer assets in order to meet these requirements and in turn protect those assets in the years ahead?
There are. It will depend, of course, on the client's goals, their family structure, the other things they want to achieve. So for a single individual who's got no close relatives, the easy thing to do is to put money into what's called a pooled special needs trust. You can put any amount in at any time. It's not a disqualifying transfer. The assets of the trust don't count, and you can get benefits almost immediately. But like the house, it's exposed to recovery at the end. But if you don't have anyone you're providing for, that's a great solution. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, so for married couples, for example, there's a thing called a Medicaid qualified annuity. There's a certain irrevocable promissory note that can be used. There's a strategy called Just Say No, in which the community spouse says, I'd rather not, and you can get benefits, but it comes with some qualifications. So the short answer is there's always something you can do. And if there's nothing else going on, you can literally give your money away, even within the 5-year period, but there are ways to mitigate the consequences, so some of that money that's given away can be held for your benefit, even if not legally enforceable. If it's someone that you trust and is trustworthy, you can do that too.
So I think I wanted to just bring out to our viewers that while Ron has touched on that there are strategies that are available, that are legitimate, that are in the toolbox, that we are going to get into those in more details in some more fact-specific situations in subsequent shows. So please stay tuned for that. But all is not lost if you seem to not meet all the criteria to start with. There are ways in order to deal with that and also preserve things for your family. Abby, the last question I have is before we go to closing comments. Do these various strategies differ for a single person versus a married person?
Yeah, in that there are more options when you are married, and that's because the rules are set up to allow you to protect money or resources for the community spouse. So there's more options that become available. With a single person, you're typically limited to only a few of the available options, depending on what your goal is. So again, if you're protecting money for yourself, you have needs that may not also be covered by Medicaid, then a pooled special needs trust, that's an easy one. It'll give you that extra money that you need. But if you're looking to protect for your heirs, then there's a whole different planning strategy that we use, and it is a little bit different than what we do for a married couple.
Okay, well that's good. Well, I see, look by the clock, as we talked about, we are getting down to that witching hour where they're gonna turn the cameras off for us. So let's go to some final comments. Okay, Ron, any final thoughts you want to share with us at this point that you want to make for our viewers?
Sure. It's a complicated system. There are a lot of protections in place, but it requires a lot of experience and knowledge to know which ones are available for which people. So, you know, I think a lot of people have trouble paying just for raw information that seems like they can get it on the internet, but it's a complicated system, and how you put those pieces together really requires that you understand how it plays out and what the consequences are. It's the work that I do, and although, as I'll warn people, you know, you won't know if you've gotten your money's worth until it's probably too late to get your money back. But the fact is, it's a system where you need to get advice to get your rights protected.
And Abby, how about just any sort of final thoughts you want to share with me?
Sure. So, you know, I think one important point is earlier is better. A lot of times people will actually not learn that there are things that they can do until they've already been spending a lot of money on a nursing facility.
Sure.
So the earlier that they can get in to see an elder law attorney, the more options there are going to be available to preserve their assets, and also to be cautious of what the nursing homes are telling you. So nursing homes will often file applications for you, but they're not necessarily looking out for your best interest. They're looking out to make sure that they get the most money that they can while they can.
And we don't want to badmouth nursing homes. They do a lot of good things, but I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Well, I want to thank both of you folks for taking the time to come in and talk about, in part one of this show, about Medicaid adult long-term care options in the District of Columbia. So it's a great service to the public, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to come in.
Well,
Thank you.
We appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. You know, without a doubt, handling the finances for an aging adult can be challenging. And nothing can be more stressful than trying to figure out how to pay for their care, especially when your loved one has no long-term care insurance or has financial resources they want to preserve for their spouse or their children. You know, DC Adult Long-Term Care Medicaid is a resource that may solve this need. But as we learned in our show this evening, there are income and asset qualification rules to navigate and common pitfalls to avoid. Do not despair, however, if the facts suggest your loved one will not qualify. There are planning strategies that can legally restructure the facts so she will. But I repeat these words of caution. Whether you are trying to qualify your loved one for adult long-term Medicaid coverage before a crisis presents itself, or are trying to qualify for Medicaid during a crisis, be forewarned that Medicaid planning is not something, again, that lends itself to do-it-yourself efforts, especially since mistakes leading to a denial of Medicaid coverage are often not curable for as long as 60 months. So, I strongly encourage you to get advice from a qualified Medicaid attorney early in your efforts to qualify your loved one for adult long-term Medicaid. Early planning, as opposed to crisis planning, typically affords more planning options, especially where you are seeking to preserve assets for your community spouse. In our next show, part 2 of this topic, we will review some of the common misunderstandings about adult long-term care Medicaid, talk about asset transfer restrictions, planning strategies used to qualify for adult long-term care Medicaid in DC, and the application process itself. This brings us to the conclusion of our show tonight. We hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.